It began spontaneously in Benghazi. It was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video.
Ambassador Susan Rice, who 5 days after the attack made the rounds on the Sunday talk shows, insisting it was a demonstration prompted by a YouTube video for an anti-Islam film that spun out of control.
There is no justification, none at all, for responding to this video with violence.
We have no information to suggest that it was a pre-planned attack. It is not a reaction to the 9/11 anniversary that we know of. The unrest around the region has been in response to this video.
But it was clearly an act of terror. People don't bring heavy weapons and rocket-propelled grenades to demonstrations because they want to demonstrate.
Self-evident that what happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
We don't know yet, and so we're going to continue to investigate this.
What happened in Benghazi was a terrorist attack.
Then I heard Hillary Clinton say that it was an act of terrorism. Is it? What do you say?
Well, we're still doing an investigation.
There's a crude and disgusting video sparked outrage throughout the Muslim world.
It was a terrorist attack.
Did you and others mislead the public because you didn't want to admit there was a terror attack?
Absolutely not. The President of the United States referred to it as an act of terror immediately after it occurred, Ed, as you know.
So 1 second. If you're citing that on September 12th, the President called it terrorism. He used a phrase like act of terror.
Act of terror.
No, of act of terror. Well, then why were you at this podium for several days after that saying we don't know if it's terrorism? If you're now
I never
saying
said that. I never said we don't know if it's terrorism.
The president was asked and asked repeatedly if this was an act of terror, and he flat out refused to say yes. In other words, he lied at that debate last night, and the cover-up continues.
It's not senseless violence. This is the heart of what's wrong with the entire Obama approach. If you are al-Qaeda and you have an opportunity to kill an American ambassador, that is, from their standpoint, a very intelligent, rational thing to do. It's precisely the inability of President Obama and his team to come to grips with the fact that we are at war with an extremist movement on a worldwide basis that wants to kill us. So from their perspective, this isn't random, senseless violence.
His administration, his campaign, and with Secretary of State Clinton standing up, she's doing the best she can to play defense for him. But in the end, the president is responsible.
Why hasn't the president given a speech or a news conference laying out to the American people? He doesn't talk about this act of terror when he goes out and visits and talks with voters. Why won't he talk about it?
So I do not agree with your assessment that he hasn't been talking about this.
President Obama maintained at the second presidential debate that he had always called this terrorism, that he knew from day one it was terrorism. And then late last night, CBS News, which had an interview, 60 Minutes, with the president on September 12th after this, releases quietly on its website a critical outtake from their interview with President Obama, where they specifically asked him whether this was terrorism. And I want you to listen to what the president said. Listen.
Mr. President, this morning you went out of your way to avoid the use of the word terrorism in connection with the Libya attack.
Right.
Do you believe that this was a terrorist attack?
Well, it's too early to know exactly how this came about, what group was involved, but obviously it was an attack on Americans. And we are going to be working with the Libyan government to make sure that we bring these folks to justice, one way or the other.
Total cover-up. Mainstream media has been totally covering up this story. It's really borders on a criminal act here.
It was instantly recognizable to me as a terrorist attack.
Instantly recognizable?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
Mainly because of my prior knowledge there, I almost expected the attack to come. We were the last flag flying. It was a matter of time.
This has been a difficult week for the State Department and for our country. We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with. It is hard for the American people to make sense of that because it is senseless.
There was no protest, and cameras reveal that, and the State Department, the FBI, and others have that video.
Lawmakers were told that Tripoli could not protect American interests.
We could not rely on the Libyan government for security, intelligence, and law enforcement help to identify emerging threats or to ask them for assistance in mitigating those threats.
When I was in Libya, good part of the day, never once did a person ever mention a video. Never. And I am fascinated to know and understand from the President of the United States, from the Secretary of State, and from the Ambassador to the United Nations how they can justify that this video caused this attack. It was a terrorist attack.
That it actually wasn't a 15-minute YouTube video. It actually was a 9/11 event, a terrorist attack. Where the heck were we before 9/11, this 9/11?
The Libyan intelligence so superior to the American intelligence that they knew within 24 hours that it was a terrorist attack, and within 6 days, we're still saying that it was the result of a video?
You're going to blame the Intelligence Committee. You come before this committee and you tell us who told you it was a video.
So the administration knew in real time there wasn't a mob. They knew in real time that this was a well-coordinated attack. They knew in real time that it involved heavy weaponry. This was clearly a terrorist attack, and the American people have clearly, as you said, been lied to.
It's been suggested that budget cuts were responsible for a lack of security in Benghazi, and I'd like to ask Ms. Lamb, you made this decision personally. Was there any budget consideration and lack of budget which led you not to increase the number of people in the security force there?
No, sir. What were you first told about the attack? Why were people talking about protests? When people in the consulate first saw armed men attacking with guns, there were no protesters.
Because
why
that's
did that
exactly
go on for
what
weeks?
we were told by
By
the
who?
intelligence community. The intelligence community told us that. As they learned more facts about exactly what happened, they changed their assessment. We weren't told they wanted more security again. We did not know they wanted more security again. And by the way, at the time, we were told exactly, we said exactly what the intelligence community told us that they knew.
He was speaking directly for himself and for the president. He meant the White House.
This attack should not have come as a surprise to anybody. I find it inconceivable they didn't know what was going on the ground with the overhead drone video and the constant communications from the defenders. We know 3 hours before the attack, the Ansar al-Sharia militia, al-Qaeda affiliated, was setting up roadblocks and checkpoints around the consulate.
3 calls for help by those who were under attack were ignored or rejected by the CIA, it looks like, and yet the CIA has denied that.
The buck stops with her. I didn't know she was in charge, did you? Maybe that's an interesting statement to me. Almost feel like there's a little dig behind that.
Well, of course, that's what Harry Truman said, and that's what it does stop with a president, which she is not. The buck with respect to providing security is certainly within her area of responsibility, and it was a failure. On the other hand, the responsibility for the way the White House has tried to cover this up and to manage it in a way that suggested that at first that it was a YouTube, that it was not anything to do with 9/11, that it was not anything to do with a planned attack with heavy weapons. I think the responsibility for that, as well as the responsibility for the Secretary of State not providing appropriate security, does in fact fall to the president.
Well, they said that this was spontaneous, a mob uprising, but we had somebody at the State Department watching in real time. Our intelligence knew in less than 24 hours that this was a terror attack. But 5 days later, they sent out, you know, Ambassador Rice was out there, Jay Carney was out there, the president was out there, even Hillary Clinton, saying that this was related to this video. That is not true. They knew it wasn't true. They had to know it wasn't true.
And Secretary Rice, of course, reports through the Secretary of State. She is a functionary of the Department of State and is responsible for what she says.
The White House's response, or lack thereof, to the Benghazi terrorist attack. Here's how it all went down inside the debate hall last night.
On the day following the assassination of a United States ambassador, the first time that's happened since 1979, when we have 4 Americans killed there, when apparently we didn't know what happened, that the president, the day after that happened, flies to Las Vegas for a political fundraiser.
The day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and I told the American people and the world that we were going to find out exactly what happened, that this was an act of terror.
I think it's interesting the president just said something which is that on the day after the attack, he went to the Rose Garden and said that this was an act of terror.
That's what I said.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. It was not a spontaneous demonstration. Is that what you're saying?
Please proceed, Governor.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror.
She's wrong. Not only was the president wrong, but so was the moderator, Candy Crowley. As we reported last night, she's already admitted it.
Right after that, I did turn around and say, but you're totally correct, that they spent 2 weeks telling us this was about a tape and that there was this riot outside the Benghazi consulate, which there wasn't. So he was right in the main. I just think he picked the wrong word.
All right, let's get to the truth here. Now, obviously, Crowley failed to adequately fact-check the president last night, so tonight we correct the record. Now, yes, it is true that the president did utter the words in the Rose Garden, acts of terror, the day after the Benghazi assault. However, he did so only after he referenced 9/11/2001. And if he really intended to call Benghazi an act of terror, then why, in that very same speech, and for the very first time in public, did he blame the event on a YouTube movie trailer video? Now, that's the same YouTube video that he wanted us to believe sparked an impromptu riot, which by definition is not a premeditated terrorist attack.
Since our founding, the United States has been a nation that respects all faiths. We reject all efforts to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. But there is absolutely no justification to this type of senseless violence. None.
Is it in any way conceivable that the White House, up to 5 days later, and then when the president repeated it on The View, 7 days later, and then went to the UN and was blaming the movie, is it possible the White House did not know and not know immediately?
I think it's not believable that the National Security Council was not aware of what the State Department was aware of and what the intelligence community was aware of. They're in constant hourly contact with both the Department of State and the intelligence community.
And if the White House lied and purposefully lied to the American people, and we're trying to cover this up, I guess, because they were telling the American people that Al-Qaeda's, finished, we've won, we've knocked them out. What does that mean in terms of potential political fallout for this president? Seems to me that this goes much deeper than an election with a orchestrated cover-up.
Contrary to the administration's original spin of a video that was so outrageous that it caused the Middle East to go on fire.
The White House, the State Department owes us more information. We know because of testimony in a hearing that Chairman Issa had that there is at least one 50-minute video that was in the possession of the State Department. We know that they were witnessing this in real time. And so for them to suddenly beg off and say, well, it was the genesis of this video, which we now know is not true, some video in the Middle East that was generated here originally in the United States, we know that's not true. We know that there wasn't a mob outside in Benghazi. Then where did they get this information? How did they brief Ambassador Rice? I mean, there's so many more questions every day that goes by.
And Congressman, in the last 48 hours, we have heard reports from sources on the ground who were telling us that there were 3 directives to stand down, to not offer the help that the CIA was asking for on the ground.
And it's just hard to believe that the White House, the president, didn't send people in to help extract and protect and save the lives of the people that were serving our country at our consulate and there at the annex. It's just unbelievable.
His United Nations speech was a disgrace. For an American president to go to the UN and apologize 6 times for a YouTube video by some nutcake, first of all, we should be defending the right of free speech. We should be saying to the Muslim world, yes, If you want to be in the modern world, guess what? You're not going to have Islamic supremacy. You're not going to be able to dictate to the rest of us. You're not going to have an American president censor on your behalf.
I think this is, Sean, one of the worst cover-ups probably in the history of the Republic.